Hi, and welcome back to my channel, where I'm redoing the Barbarian's Path of the Totem Warrior class specialization from the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook module. As you might know, a Barbarian is a class who makes use of the rage capabilities for various things that they can do. The Path of the Totem Warrior is slightly different from other Barbarian class specializations because it allows the character to adopt a totem spirit and gain different kinds of benefits depending on the totem selected. The totem spirit is a representation of different kinds of beasts. Though the Player's Handbook only introduces the bear, eagle, and wolf spirits, other supplements do add new beasts to that list. I'll be sure to provide links to the Barbarian playlist as well as to the video or videos that make up the adjustments to this class specialization in the description of the video below. Each spirit is going to grant your character different features, and as we cover each feature, we're going to go through those that are specific to the Player's Handbook and ensure this video remains relatively contained with respect to that. Once again, Barbarians gain their class specialization at level 3, much like any other classes that were published by the Player's Handbook. Part of the reason for that is that a Barbarian must learn how to channel that rage, and in this particular case, find out how to summon the spirit totems, which are actually going to capitalize on that rage capability, which is finally achieved as a character reaches level 3. In our case, I've created an example character, and I'm going to use this level 2 character as the basis for this video. If you want to learn how to create a Barbarian class character, please review the base Barbarian class videos that you can find within the playlist that has already been linked. So let's go ahead and apply level 3 to this character, and I'll show you what happens when we do that. The first thing I'm going to want to do is click on this magnifying glass up next to Barbarian 2. Once I do that, it's going to pop open a submenu. I'm going to click on this level up button, and that's going to open up the character wizard once again. I'm going to increase our level from 2 to 3, and that's going to present us with our class specialization selection screen. In this case, I want Path of the Totem Warrior. And as soon as I do that, we're going to see our new features that we're going to gain, which I'll be going over in a moment, and no additional changes that are going to be required for us to deal with. I'm also going to make sure that this gets updated to ensure that it differs from the initial video of the Path of the Totem Warrior that I did. The first feature your character is going to gain at level 3 is called Spirit Seeker, and it helps your character benefit from their attunement to nature. It is going to grant your character the means to cast the Beast Sense and Speak with Animal spells as ritual spells, meaning that you'll need to add 10 minutes casting time to each of those spells as a representation of how long it's going to take to cast them. As such, these are not going to be spells that you can make use of during a combat-based scenario, because that's a really limited duration within each round that is going to be granted to each player. Thus, the intent of the designers of this particular class specialization mean for you to actually go through and make use of these spells outside of those combat situations and potentially use them to pull in some allies or get some information. As this is a fairly straightforward feature to cover, I'm just simply going to go ahead and look for our spells. So I'm going to first look for Beast Sense, which is right there. I'm going to ensure that when I add this, it's just going to drop it into its own spell group here. And then I'm going to look for Speak with Animals and also drop that into place. And now we have a level 1 and level 2 spell category here. And the good news for us is that there's really nothing that we have to do. Normally, when you're taking a spell from a spell list and converting it into a ritual spell, if it isn't already one from the get-go, you would have to pop this open up the editor here, and then ensure that this ritual tag was selected. In this case, it is already in place for both of these particular spells, so we don't need to do anything. Now, when you actually go through and use these as rituals, all you're going to do is click here to indicate to the Dungeon Master that you are, in fact, making use of Beast Sense in order to begin that ritual and begin to sense those beasts that it's going to present to you. Otherwise, the spells themselves are going to work exactly the same as they are here. The only issue that you're going to run into is that it's not going to be an action. You can only use this as a ritual. At the same time that your character gains the Spirit Seeker feature, your character is also going to gain the Totem Spirit feature. At the time that you take this feature, you must choose one of the spirit animals here that are linked in this feature, or create one of your own that uses one of these or one of the ones from the supplements as a basis for their creation. When you do, your character is going to assume some physical aspect of that totem spirit at the time that the feature is added. And what I mean by that is that your character's physical appearance is going to change slightly or take on specific traits of the selected totem spirit. And the information sheet provides a few examples of how that can work. Or if you're going to be creating your own creature, you would look at creating some physical aspect that relates to that particular creature. I usually encourage my players to do a little bit of research about the selected totem spirit in relation to its real-world counterpart, and then select what changes have occurred to their character. That way each character becomes unique from one party to the next. In a few minutes, I'm going to begin showing you how to create the effects for each of these example totems. But when you start to add them to your own character's actions tab, you're only going to want to add the one that's appropriate for the character's selected totem. And that's because your character's not going to gain the other beast's aspects, be they effects, benefits, or faults, beyond those provided by the selected totem spirit themselves. So let's begin adding what we can from this particular selected list. And the first one that I'm going to focus on is the bear spirit. In order to go through and set that up, we need to ensure that we have something here within our action sheet. I'm going to go ahead and drag this into place, and then I'm going to create a Path of the Totem Warrior grouping, if you will, that sort of matches this. And that's going to move it down into its own little subgroup. Now I'm going to first add the effect, and then I'm going to go over the feature option itself. So what we want to do is right click on this feature listing here, left click on this add action option, and then left click on this add effect option, and then just simply click on this magnifying glass here with the left mouse button to open it up. I'm then just simply going to copy and paste an effect that I've already created for us, and then I'll explain what this does. The bear option itself gives us the ability to have resistance to all damage effects except for psychic damage. And here's the thing, that does include magic as the damage type, which means that we have to create an effect that works with that functionality. So we're going to go with Totem Spirit, which is of the bear grouping, if you will, semicolon, capital I, capital F, colon, and that's an if condition is what we're setting up here. And then we're going to go with custom and then rage. And that's because this effect is only going to work if rage itself is active. So it's going to look for the rage effect and then make sure that these resistances apply. If you're not enraged, this is going to have absolutely no effect on your character. And then the rest of the statement is that we have a semicolon after our custom search. And in all in capital letters, we're going to have resist, colon, and then all in lowercase letters, all, and then tell it that it's not going to include psychic in that damage listing. So we're initially providing an inclusive list and then throwing in the exceptions to that list is a good way to look at that. We're also going to want to ensure that the targeting is set to our own character, which means self in this particular case, because no other character can benefit from this. In addition to that, it's never going to need a duration, and it's never going to expend when we use this sort of format to control when that resistance comes into play. If you were to make use of a duration, you're going to want to align that with the duration remaining for your rage effect. And that's primarily because rage has to exist in order for this to function. But the good news here is that you don't necessarily need to do that when you use this if condition, because it's going to simply check to ensure that rage already exists. And if it does, then apply the resistances to your character. Now, the way this will work once you're in a combat-based situation is going to be as follows. The first thing you're going to want to do is enable rage. And by ensuring that this is set and applied, you can now go ahead, oops, I didn't want to click on that, I wanted to click on that. You can now go ahead and apply this particular effect here. And what that does is that sets up a check on this rage effect by using this particular custom search tag. Now, if I go ahead and set up a particular attack on our particular barbarian here, then what we should see is resistances will be applied to any incoming damage. So off screen, what I've done is I've moved the attack action, if you will, up to the vampire, because they're going to be the next one to go. And I'm just going to simply drag and drop some bludgeoning damage on top of our character here. And what we'll see is that we see a partially resisted effect here in relation to the incoming damage. And to show that the psychic damage will bypass that particular resistance, if you will, I've gone ahead and added a new creature to our list, and I'm just simply going to drag and drop psychic damage onto our character. And as we can see, we took the full amount of damage. There's no partially resisted statement here, meaning that it bypassed the actual resistances. Perfect, that's what we want. With respect to the Eagle Spirit, there are actually two things that you're going to gain with this particular selection. One, we can partially set up as something that will work, and the other is something that we can look into. To add the effect, all I have to do is go and right-click on this once again, select that, and then select Add Effect. And I'm going to simply paste in something I've already created for us. I've called it Totem Spirit once again, but this time with a subtext of Eagle. I'm using the same if condition to test if Rage is there, but in this particular case, I'm granting disadvantage on incoming attacks of opportunity. And that's what this does, and again, it's going to apply to your own character. The second option is the dash action, and there really isn't a default feature or function, if you will, when it comes to dash. But there are extensions out there that do add the dash as an actionable item that you can throw into here so that you can actually have it tick up inside of your chat log when you go ahead and click on it. All the dash action allows you to do is move an extra amount of space equal to your normal movement speed. So you could theoretically cover a little bit more distance during the overall encounter. The unfortunate part about this particular effect is we have no way to test whether your character is wearing heavy armor or not. There isn't a check available to us that we can use to see if they are quote-unquote armored and whether that is a heavy armor. Because you could theoretically still be looking at wearing light or medium sizes of armor, or weights of armor, I should say, not sizes. It only restricts us in respect to heavy armor. So, in order for both of these things to work, this effect here and the dash capability, you have to have Rage enabled, and you can't be wearing heavy armor. Those are your conditions. And you can think of it this way. The reason why you're gaining the ability to grant disadvantage on incoming attacks of opportunities because of the fact that you're gaining extra quote-unquote speed, if you will, during your overall movement capabilities. Thus, you're moving around the field of battle too fast for anyone to really be able to hit you. For normal attacks, obviously, normal damage and normal attack rolls are still going to apply. This is only coming into play in relation to attacks of opportunity. So how does an attack actually get tagged as an attack of opportunity? Well, under this modifiers option here, there's this opportunity button. And what that does is that tells Fantasy Grounds that this attack is going to be an attack of opportunity. And that's because some other restrictions or benefits might come into play when you tell Fantasy Grounds that you're going to be doing that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ensure that our character has this particular effect in place, and I'm going to remove the bear effect. Now, what I'm then going to do is make sure that our character's not dead, almost dead. Hang on one second. There we go. Now, what I can do is I can attack our character from the Dungeon Master side of things and tag that attack as an attack of opportunity. We have Rage in place, so in theory, we should be able to ensure that we're granting disadvantage, and we should see 2 dice rolls here in this chat box. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and tag this attack as an attack of opportunity, and I'm going to make the attack roll itself. And we can see right here that we do in fact have 2 rolls. Now it's an automatic miss because our Shadow Daemon, if you will, rolled a 1. The other value it rolled was a 6. You can't see that here because I'm not displaying that information on this particular screen. But in this particular case, that's what happened. It was tagged as an attack of opportunity. In fact, I can even show you. So if you look right here, we see that it was an attack of opportunity and that it rolled with a red dice, meaning that it rolled 2 dice. With respect to the dash action, yes, this does mean that you could potentially use dash twice in your turn. So consider that if you went through and made your normal movement speed, that's going to be 30 feet for this character. You then decided to dash and forfeit your attack action. Well, that's another 30 feet for a total of 60 feet. Now, as a bonus action, you could theoretically use dash again. And that means that you can travel a total of 90 feet with this particular character. Because of the distance here in this case, their movement speed is 30. If it was higher, you'd move further. If it was less, you would move slightly shorter distances. And that means that your character can effectively control the field of battle by being able to move to where they are needed and reduce the chances that they're going to get hit when they move out of a particular creature's sphere of influence. When it comes to the Wolf Spirit, because this is something that is going to affect other party members, not your own character, we cannot make use of the check, if you will, when it comes to the Rage test. So what we will need to do is create an effect that looks like this. It's simply Totem Spirit of the Wolf and its advantage on attacks. And we leave everything else untouched. You could potentially put in a duration just to ensure that it expires and it has to be reset each round. That could theoretically be a good way to go ahead and do this, because it would clear out any outstanding effects and clear out any creatures that may have moved outside of your 5-foot reach, if you will. But the idea here is that you as the Barbarian are going to have to manage this particular effect a little bit. So there's really no easy way to go ahead and do this in relation to this particular feature. Now, just give me 1 second. I'm going to go ahead and import another character so that we can show you what this does. Now, what this effect does is that any creature that is within 5 feet of your character, you have the ability to grant your party members advantage on attack rolls that they make against those particular creatures. So if Zombie 18 was 20 feet away from your particular character, that effect would not benefit them. But let's say Zombie 10, Skeleton 8, and the Shadow Daemon are, then all 3 of these could benefit from incoming attacks, if you will. Sorry, I should say the characters can benefit from incoming attacks on any of those 3 creatures and gain that ability to attack them with advantage. How that's going to work is that on your turn, you're going to activate Rage. You're then going to apply this effect to multiple party members. There's no restriction on just being one party member, because it's your entire party or even your friends, so anyone who's an ally of your character, that gains this particular advantage. So as soon as you decide to activate this effect, you want to throw it on all of your party members as well as any allies that happen to be in the combat tracker. The catch is that there's a little bit of management that you are going to have to do. And what you're going to do is make use of this target reticule here and drag that onto the creatures that are going to be within 5 feet of your character. So we said Shadow Daemon, Skeleton 8, and Zombie 10. And you can see that this effect is now going to be quote-unquote linked to only these 3 creatures. Now what will happen is that when the Dungeon Master moves the turn ahead and Bluebell becomes our next character, or you advance the turn and they become the next character, they can go ahead and attack any one of these creatures and gain advantage on those attacks. So if I go ahead and target, say, the Shadow Daemon here, when I make my attack roll, they're going to gain advantage on that attack roll. And nice, they did critical damage, so I'm going to go ahead and apply that damage. Oops. Oh yeah, there it is. I thought it applied to the green dragon for a second, but it was actually the Shadow Daemon that it applied to. Now, if instead I were to attack the adult green dragon here, which is quote-unquote not designated as being within 5 feet of our character, we're not going to gain that advantage roll here because it wasn't in our selection list that we linked that particular effect to. And that covers everything that we're going to want to pay attention to in relation to Totem Spirit. So I'm going to go ahead and advance this so that we gain access to the aspect of the beast feature. Once your character reaches Barbarian level 6, they're going to gain access to the aspect of the beast feature. I'm going to go ahead and level us up here so that you can see what that looks like. At the time that your character gains this feature, they will once again have to choose a totem spirit that will grant them the effects related to that spirit. One thing I should point out about this is that you can choose the same spirit that you did for Totem Spirit, or you can choose a different one. Because the spirit you select here doesn't have to be the same that you selected within the Totem Spirit. And when you select a different spirit here, it's not going to change the one that you selected for Totem Spirit. What's going to happen here is that Totem Spirit will remain whatever spirit you had selected there, and then Aspect of the Beast will make use of whatever spirit you select here. There's no restriction within this subclass or class specialization that says you are not going to be able to choose multiple spirits, or when you choose a different spirit that it replaces it. That's not what happens in this particular case. You retain the selection you made for each feature as you go forward. Once again, however, it's implied, even though it's not definitively stated, that when you select the aspect of the beast that's different from the totem spirit here, you're going to gain some physical feature that changes in respect to your character. So let's say that in the first one you chose the bear, so you may have looked a little bit bulkier, for example, but in this one you decide to choose the eagle. Well, you could choose that your eyes change to a different color. Now, some DMs aren't going to make you do that. Others might. I do actually make you go through that process if you choose to select different ones here. Now, if you happen to select the same spirit, you don't gain any other feature or aspect that changes. I just like to make it so that physical appearances relate to the spirits that you have chosen if they differ. And when you think about it, it makes a little bit of sense because your character is more or less, quote unquote, tuning themselves to being able to communicate and draw on the power from those animal spirits. When that happens, your body sort of develops some mechanism of a focus, if you will, that would allow you to actually complete that communication link. At least that's the way that I see it. But once again, you only get to choose one of these particular options within this feature. So if you chose bear for totem spirit, and you decide to choose eagle for this particular feature here, you would not gain any of these two aspects. You would only gain the benefits of eagle from this feature and retain the features that you had for totem spirit. With the bear spirit, your character is going to gain a few things. And the first is the amount of weight that your character can lift or carry doubles. And the other is that you're gaining advantage on all checks that require strength and deal with things like pushing, pulling, lifting, or even breaking objects. Unfortunately, Fantasy Grounds does not provide an obvious way to modify the carry or lift weight maximums that your character is going to have underneath their inventory selection here. And there are some tricks that used to be available to us that allowed us to fake those kinds of changes, such as adding an item here that had a negative weight to sort of counter the amount of weight that your character was actually carrying, and other things that came into play. However, all is not lost. There is an extension on the Fantasy Grounds Forge site that can handle those kinds of changes, and I'll be sure to provide that link to that particular item in the description below if you want to go ahead and use that. But there actually is still one trick that does function within Fantasy Grounds, and it's making use of a trait called Powerful Build. If you look under the races campaign here, and you go to, I believe it's under Orc, if I'm not mistaken, you can see that there is a feature here called Powerful Build. And what it does is it allows your character to double their carrying weight and lift weight capacities that we have to deal with here. So in theory, it should go from 300 to 600, and this should go from 600 to 1200. Well, the good news is, if you chose to choose the bear spirit, all you have to do is go to abilities, and under traits, simply add in Powerful Build. Just like that. And as soon as you do that, your weights will double. Unfortunately, we are in fact tricking Fantasy Grounds into thinking that your character has that trait when they in fact don't. But it's an option that allows you to natively make use of Fantasy Grounds features and not have to worry about adding an extension to your system to be able to handle that kind of change. When it comes to the advantage on these kinds of strength checks, there isn't a way to test whether you're doing a push, pull, lift, or breaking of an object with respect to those checks. So we don't want to go and create an effect here that would be applicable to our character in any way, shape, or form. All we want to do is make use of this advantage button because it's a very selective grouping, if you will, of options that this advantage roll is going to come into play. So if your character is having to, say, for example, lift a bureau, and it's a very heavy bureau because it's made of some very dense metal of some kind, you would gain advantage to that by clicking on the advantage button here, going to your main tab, and then making a strength check based off of that. And as you can see, it would roll twice, although in this case, it's a pretty bad roll. But that's essentially how that would function. With respect to the inventory, using that trait already makes the final adjustment that we need for that, so we don't need to worry about anything around that. With respect to the eagle option, this feature gives your character the means to see further, up to a mile away, and see as if they were only 100 feet away, so you can make out details that you would usually make out at 100 feet. It is also removing the disadvantages for perception-based checks with respect to dim light, meaning that as long as there is light in whatever room you happen to be in, you will be able to make normal perception rolls. And it's only when there's no light that you're going to start suffering those penalties. In either of these cases, there's not really much we can do to add anything to our character sheet around that. Yes, we could create an action here that gives us advantage on perception rolls, but once again, why do that when there's a nice simple click on that, and then you roll your perception roll and you're done. You don't have to worry about going here, adding an effect to your character, and then going here and making that perception roll. It just simplifies things a little bit more. Now, if there was more to it, then yes, it would make a little bit more sense to create an effect here. And that's also no way to test whether we're in dim or lit or no light based scenarios, even with the line of sight functionality in place. There isn't any option that we can go, hey, am I in a low lit area? Okay, then I don't have to suffer that penalty. If Fantasy Grounds adds that functionality, then yeah, we might want to revisit this and add some form of effect to be able to make use of those tests. How that perception roll is actually going to work is more or less going to be as follows. The DM is going to call out that you are going to need to make a perception-based check with disadvantage because of dim light. Well, you're then going to counter with, I don't suffer that penalty because of this, provided you chose this particular option here. What's going to happen is if the Dungeon Master has already enabled the disadvantage capability, all you have to do is click the advantage one to cancel it out. But ideally what they would do is just simply hit dis again to deselect that as a disadvantage roll, and then you just make a normal perception roll. Where is it here? Much like this. Now, I did click on the ADV option earlier. That is only going to apply if and only if the DIS effect is there, because you want to cancel out the disadvantage effect. If, however, the Dungeon Master has already done that for you, you don't use the advantage, because you're not gaining advantage on something, you're just losing the disadvantage on those rolls. If, however, you decide to choose the wolf option, once again, there's nothing here that we're going to want to deal with adding in relation to our character's action sheet. And that's because this affects traveling penalties. Not normal movement penalties, but something where you're traveling from one location to another at a much quicker pace or further distance than you normally would. Movement around a field of battle, it isn't going to really apply there. Now, if you go to Modules, Player's Handbook, load up the reference manual, and then just search for travel, you will find this movement capability here, movement page here. And what you want to do is read through this travel pace section here. But you're also going to find a chart that references how many feet per minute you can travel, or hour, or day, or whatever. And what those effects are actually going to be without any benefits that you're getting from here. In this particular case, what's actually happening is that the ability to use stealth here is being included into the normal pace. And this penalty here just completely goes away. That's if you choose this. The other benefit here is that none of these particular features here require you to have rage enabled. If you take a close look here, nothing here states that you need to be enraged. And in fact, when you're dealing with travel pace, that's an impossibility at this particular level, because in order for you to retain rage, you have to get hit in some way. So whether you're on a horse and you decide to fall off to suffer damage, well, there's no real way to maintain that kind of rage for that kind of duration, specifically when you're traveling for days. But it's this kind of travel pace where this comes into play, and that is not something that you can manage with an effect here. Now, as another benefit, when you take this option, you do gain the ability to track other creatures while you are traveling at a fast pace. You also can now maintain stealth even while traveling at a normal pace and not suffer any penalties because of that. But there is a catch to this. This is only going to affect your character. It is not going to apply to the rest of your party members. Unlike some of the ranger features that do grant that capability, this is strictly locked into your character. But that does cover everything that we need to go over in relation to Aspect of the Beast. So let's go ahead and prepare for our next feature, which is Spirit Walker. At Barbarian level 10, that's when your character is going to gain the Spirit Walker feature. And there's nothing else we need to do here, so let's go ahead and commit this, and then let's take a look at this feature. With this feature, you're being granted the ability to make use of the Commune with Nature spell as a ritual, in the same way that your character gained access to the Beast Sense and Speak with Animal spells. When you add the spell to your character sheet, you should double check to make sure that, once again, that ritual tag is set. So let's go with Commune. That'll be this. So I'm going to go ahead and throw that onto our character, and I'm going to make sure that I throw this into an area below the spell groups here so that it doesn't land in a power group, because this is a level 5 spell. If I pop this open, we can see that the ritual element is already in place and that the ritual tag is here. That's why this is here in the first place. But it's always good to just double check. It's almost guaranteed that it's going to be there, but I always like to make sure that it is. It's entirely possible that your Dungeon Master has provided additional supplements that give variations to these spells, and as a result, they might not have that ritual tag component linked into that particular version of the spell. Now, once again, this feature is not something that you can make use of. Well, I suppose you could if you wanted to try to cast a ritual during combat. The only problem is it would take 99 some odd turns for that to actually function for the 10-minute period. But you get the point. It's not really meant to actually be done within a combat-based situation. You're meant to be sitting at a campfire or at a tent or some form of rest location and then going through this to be able to communicate with that particular spirit. And it's going to summon a physical manifestation of that spirit in that whole process. And your character is going to be projecting their questions at that manifested version of the spirit, and that creature is in turn going to respond back to you through that particular projection. However, all other aspects of this spell remain the same. The only difference here is it's a ritual. It's not something you can cast in 1 minute. Now, there is one thing that I do want to point out. Because this spell takes a minute to cast, it means that your character has to spend 11 minutes to be able to cast this spell. And that's because when you're casting a ritual, you're adding 10 minutes to the total cast time. So if this had 20 minutes here as its casting time, normally, then it would become 30 minutes because of the additional 10 minutes that you're adding to it. That's the difference between a ritual versus a non-ritual spell. You could, if you wanted to, simply modify this and change that to 11 minutes, just so that you don't forget. And then if you're going to do that, just make note somewhere in this that you've already made that adjustment so that you don't realize, oh crap, now it's going to take me 21 minutes. In this case, it's just going to take 11. Level 14 is where your character is going to gain the last feature that this class specialization is going to go and grant to your character. And it's called Totemic Attunement. And once again, it's a Barbarian class. It's not going to grant you this if you're increasing your character level, meaning that you've multi-classed. It's a feature that works very similar to the Totem Spirit and Aspect of the Beast features in that you're going to have to select a particular Totem Spirit to represent the specific effects associated with this feature. That means that you can choose a completely different spirit that you have chosen between the Totem Spirit and the Aspect of the Beast features. So if you had selected Bear for Totem Spirit and then Eagle for Aspect of the Beast, you are quite freely to choose any one of these three in relation to this particular feature, including the Wolf or any of the other ones that come through the supplements. And once again, if you're in my campaign and you do choose something that's different from the other two that you've already chosen, then what's going to happen is you're most likely going to take a small physical change in relation to that as your character gains this feature. And that's because it's, once again, implied that your body is going to take on some form of adjustment that is going to act as your focus to be able to talk to that particular spirit. At least that's the way that I read this particular class specialization and the features that go with it. If you choose the Bear Spirit, then you're going to be able to offer enhanced protection to any teammate who's under attack, as long as the creature making that attack can see or hear your character and is not immune to the frightened effect while your character is raging. As long as those conditions are in play, you'll be able to grant disadvantage to that creature when they attack any of your party members or allies, but it won't work if they are attacking your own character. This is something that we can add to our action sheet because we're going to be granting a benefit in relation to this to other players and other characters. I'm going to again move this into here and then set up an effect that's going to be associated with this particular feature. And it's going to look like this: Totemic Attunement for the Bear, semicolon, and then grant disadvantage on attacks. We are going to do some finagling with this, but we're not going to make any adjustments here. You could potentially set this up so that it expends on the next roll, or you have a duration for the end of the round so that you go back and reset this in case things change in relation to what those creatures are that are around your character. But in this particular case, I'm not going to worry too much about it for this example. The way that this is going to work is as follows. When it is your turn, you're going, once again, I click that, you're going to select the rage effect and ensure that that's enabled on your character. That's not what the one I wanted. That was Feral Instinct. There we go. This is rage. With that now in place, you're then going to want to identify which creatures are near your character, specifically within 5 feet of your character, can hear and see you, and are not immune to the frightened effect. And then apply this effect to your party members. And you'll want to do this to all of the affected party members. Here is why. If any of the creatures that are within your character's reach, so 5 feet from your character, and the other conditions apply, if they attack any of your party members, they're going to gain disadvantage on those attacks. They won't gain disadvantage on attacks that they make to your character. So let's say that once again, the Shadow Daemon, Skeleton 8, and Zombie 10 here are all going to be affected by this. So I'm going to drag and drop this link to those particular creatures once again. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the Dungeon Master screen so that you can see what this looks like. All right, so I'm going to move the turn towards the Shadow Daemon here. They're going to target Bluebell, or they could simply drag and drop an attack on Bluebell. It doesn't much matter. It's going to work. Because they are selected in the list of creatures that this particular effect is going to apply to, they're going to suffer an attack of disadvantage. And as we can see here, they rolled with disadvantage. Now, if this particular creature chose to attack my character, they're not going to suffer that disadvantage. If a creature during their turn, so let's set the vampire as our next creature that's going, if they make an attack roll against Bluebell, they're not going to suffer that disadvantage because they're not in that selected list of creatures. Now, if I take this vampire and then drag and drop that into place because that vampire moved in range of the Barbarian so that they're 5 feet and the other conditions apply, now when they make that attack roll, they're going to suffer that disadvantage effect. So you can see how it's very easy to make this kind of adjustment and link it to very specific creatures and characters and lock it down utilizing that target functionality. That's exactly how this feature is going to work, and this is exactly the way that we want it to work. What you as the player are going to have to do is be extremely cognizant as to which creatures remain within 5 feet of your character and don't have those other conditions in place, and which of your particular party members those creatures are targeting and are going to attack if they're not directly attacking your own character. The whole idea of this is that that creature is going to realize, oh crap, it's a little bit harder to hit Bluebell than it is to hit the Barbarian, and thus refocus the attacks against your character because you can soak up a crap ton of damage. You want the attacks to be made against your character. You're the one that's meant to tank this particular campaign, unless you have another character who's designated as the party tank. Although in that case, technically you could also assist there and trade the tanking capabilities in the event that, say, your other tank is being at risk of being killed off. You can begin to focus all of the attacks on your character and hopefully save them from being killed during that encounter. I should also state that your character must be enraged in order for all of your party members to gain that benefit. If you decide to go with the Eagle Spirit, your character gains the ability to fly while using their movement over a given turn, and while your character is raging, and this is key, your character has to be raging. However, there is a catch to this. Your character is not going to be able to end their turn in the air without falling and suffering fall damage because there's not going to be anything to hold them up unless they've actually specifically attached themselves to something or have landed on something that is going to hold them up. It is actually quite rare that when a character gains the ability to fly through a feature, that they have the ability to maintain that flight between turns. Usually you have to fly up, fly to where you're going, and then land before your turn ends in order for that feature to apply properly. Using our character has a movement speed of 30 feet. What would then happen is that your character can move utilizing that 30 feet in any direction, but they would need to land before they finished that movement. So they always have to have enough movement at the end of it to be able to get back to the ground. This generally means you're going to lift yourself off the ground by 5 feet, so you now have 25 feet of movement left. You move 20 feet in any direction that you're going, and then you use the remaining 5 feet to once again land on the ground. That's generally how that would work. Now, if your character gained the ability to use the dash action as both their movement and as a bonus action, you can gain 30 or 60 additional feet in that you can add to that total calculation. You just have to have enough space to get off the ground, so usually it's 5 feet, and then enough space to be able to land again, which once again is usually 5 feet. But this isn't something that we need to add as an effect associated with this particular feature. With the Wolf Spirit, things work a little bit differently, but your character still needs to be raging for the ability to actually be able to use these actions comes into play. As a bonus action, your character can choose to knock prone the target that your character just hit with an attack during an action phase of your character's turn. The only requirement in this case is that your character must have hit them and that their size must be large or smaller. Let's say, for example, that your character attacked and hit an orc during your character's attack turn while they were utilizing their attack action. They would then be able to knock that orc prone, and there's no saving throw in play for them to be able to avoid that particular effect from happening to them. So if you hit that orc, you get to knock them prone, and they don't get to do anything about it. This means that that orc is going to be knocked to the ground and gain the prone effect, making them vulnerable to attacks from incoming melee-based attacks, i.e. someone's within 5 feet of the character, or the orc in this case. Now, the one thing to consider, by this time your character has already gained the ability for extra attacks, and some DMs are going to allow you to attack once, and if you hit, make use of your bonus action before you make use of your second attack. Doing so is going to give your character advantage on that second attack as long as your character has moved to a position where they're within 5 feet of that orc. We are going to want to add a new effect to this. Essentially what we're going to do is this. Totemic wolf attack. This should actually be a semicolon. I apologize. And then it's going to knock them prone. And it's going to not have a duration. It is going to remain on any target that you apply and is never going to expend, because there's no limitation to the duration of this. Once you knock somebody prone, it's up to them to decide when to stand up. Let's say, for example, that I'm going to attack this Shadow Daemon. Rage is already in place. I've already got them targeted. I'm going to make my attack roll against the Shadow Daemon. That's going to be a hit. But here's the catch. They are immune to the prone effect. That means that I can't actually apply that prone effect there. You will notice that prone is not listed here as an effect that's in play. The reason why we got the partially immune aspect of it is the keyword prone. It still thinks that this is there. So if you don't want to see that show up there, what you can do is just eliminate that and set that up for prone. Get rid of that. And then when you attempt to drop the effect into place, it's simply going to tell you that the target is immune to that effect. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to attack Skeleton 11. And hopefully this time I will not roll a critical hit against them. Good. In this particular case, I hit. I'm going to roll my damage. Okay, that's good. I'm then going to add my prone effect to them and then make my second attack. You can see here that I'm now rolling 2 dice. And that's because I'm gaining advantage on that particular attack roll. That's what this ADV flag here means, and the fact that the dice is green. I would then go ahead and roll my damage. Now, there's not going to be a double damage effect here that comes into play. It's just simply going to be normal damage, and in this case, it's killed it outright. But that's an example of how that works. What isn't going to happen is that if you make the attack when you're within 5 feet with the battle axe, and then you knock them prone, and then you choose to step out past the 10-foot range, or 5-foot range, I should say, so that you could throw the javelin at it, that won't have advantage when it comes to that attack roll. However, the system is not going to pick up that you've moved that distance away unless you're utilizing a map to indicate to it that you've got distance associated with it. However, what you will also find is sometimes that will still make the attack with advantage. So what you will want to do is make sure that you either have disadvantage there or you temporarily remove prone, make your attack, and then put it back. This class specialization is one of the few examples of making use of a class to connect with the spiritual aspects of Dungeons & Dragons. It adds the mystical elements to the class, giving it a nice variation over simply using brute force-based attacks, although many aspects of the spiritual enlightenment, if you will, are there to enhance the already brutal nature and brutal aspect of the Barbarian class character. Linking the Barbarian to nature-related spirits does add the tribalistic culture of characters who are generally from areas further afield than densely populated areas, or come from wilder lands, not yet cleared of all dangerous creatures that might inhabit it. However, this does bring us to the end of this video. I hope you found it useful and informative, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. I want to thank you for watching this video, and if you found the information useful, click on that like button as well as leave a comment below, as it helps the channel gain exposure. Also, consider subscribing, as I release content similar to this topic quite regularly on the channel.